One team that I thought was in a position to do themselves a whole lot of good in the 2014 NFL Draft was the Jacksonville Jaguars. They had numerous picks, numerous day three picks that allowed them the flexibility if they needed to be able to move up and get the players that they felt were best going to fit what they do, either on the offensive or defensive side of the football. And the Jacksonville Jaguars made a few moves throughout the draft, utilizing those draft picks as the currency that they are designed to be. And heading into this 2014 NFL Draft, I look at the challenge ahead for head coach Gus Bradley and general manager David Caldwell, because you look at it and you could argue that the Jacksonville Jaguars were the least talented organization in all of the National Football League. Their roster, their 53-man roster, is perhaps, along maybe with the Oakland Raiders heading into the offseason, was the least impressive in all of the NFL. So obviously, above all else, more than anything else in this draft, Gus Bradley, David Caldwell, the Jacksonville Jaguars needed to come out of this draft with talent. They needed to upgrade the roster, the talent on the roster, the young talent on the roster. Now, they spent some money in free agency to bring in some different guys, some different pieces, but ultimately, you build your teams through the NFL draft, and it's important for Gus Bradley and David Caldwell to be able to have a successful draft here. And not only did this organization lack talent on the roster, I always feel like the Jacksonville Jaguars really lack a clear-cut identity. They lack an appeal. They lack that something that everybody says, this is what the Jacksonville Jaguars are known for. This is who you have to game plan against. Ultimately, the Jaguars have none of that. And you knew at some point in time in the 2014 NFL Draft, the Jaguars organization finally realized after 3 years, maybe too long, that Blaine Gabbert wasn't the answer. They popped him off to San Francisco for a sixth-round pick. You knew they were going to take a young quarterback. You just didn't know when, and you didn't maybe necessarily know who it was. And I think the Jacksonville Jaguars did a good job of keeping their plans under wraps, because some of the stuff that they did in the draft, nobody really anticipated coming. In terms of the draft results, and again, you can look at all the picks for the Jacksonville Jaguars in the description box down below, you know, they went out and about, I think, in my opinion, trying to establish an identity as an organization, and they tried to establish a new direction. And ultimately, the way to do that is by drafting a young quarterback and then building around him. In terms of the best pick that I think the Jaguars had in the 2014 NFL Draft, I think it has to be Marqise Lee, the wide receiver from USC. Heading into the 2013 college season, he was presumably a top 10, if not top 5 talent for the 2014 NFL Draft. He had a knee injury, which kind of limited his production a little bit, but this is still an incredibly talented player, a potential big-time impact difference maker at the wide receiver position. And for the Jaguars to be able to have him fall into their laps at pick number 39, that was a steal. There's no question about it. In terms of the pick that I think gives them potentially the best value long term, I look at their 7th round selection, number 222 overall, Storm Johnson, the running back out of Central Florida. Here's a guy that I had graded as the number 3 running back, in the 2014 NFL draft class. This guy has size, he has speed, he has the ability to run with some power, he has some make-you-miss ability, he has some ability to catch the ball to the backfield. Even if you didn't think he was that great of a prospect, like compared to me, you thought maybe he was a 4th or 5th round prospect, I think most people would agree that getting a Storm Johnson in the 7th round was a tremendous steal and a tremendous value for the Jaguars organization. In fact, it wouldn't be a surprise for me to see him get some significant carries in 2014 and maybe be the long-term starter at running back for Blake Bortles and the Jacksonville Jaguars offense. The pick that I think could surprise a little bit might be Allen Robinson, their other 2nd-round pick, the wide receiver out of Penn State. I love the fact that the Jaguars identified their quarterback, said, we're going to take him, and then we're going to give him some help. We can't count on Justin Blackman. We really only have Cecil Short and guys like Ace Sanders. You're not going to win anything with those guys being your featured weapons in your offense. They're more complementary pieces. So they went about getting Marqise Lee, and then they followed it up at the end of round 2, moved up in the round, to get a guy like Allen Robinson from Penn State, a guy that you could have argued maybe was a late first to no later than mid-second round talent. Again, a good value for the Jacksonville Jaguars at the end of round 2, understanding that all the draft picks that they had were really draft pick currency, and as a result, you occasionally need to use that. It's not just about the quantity of players. Sometimes it's about the quality of the players. And getting a guy like Allen Robinson at pick number 61, I think, was a tremendous value. A tremendous value for the Jacksonville Jaguars, and a good job by them of recognizing the fact that they lack talent on the offensive side of the football in particular, and they lack impact players and difference makers on the outside in the passing game. You don't know if and when Justin Blackmon's ever going to come back into the fold. So you have to prepare as if you're going to have life without him. And getting a Marqise Lee and an Allen Robinson, a guy, again, that I saw on film that reminded me somewhat of a Keenan Allen, with some speed, but not explosive speed, but decent size, good hands, a good route runner, a guy I think, again, could come in and really surprise. In terms of the second guessing I maybe have for this draft, I look at them trading up into the third round to get Brandon Linder, the guard out of Miami. I just wonder if they couldn't have sat put in round 4 or even round 5 and maybe got him. I'm not sure he was the guy that you needed to trade up into the end of round 3 in order to ensure that you got. Nor do I think he was the best offensive lineman on the board at that time. But again, my opinion. I also second guess the selection of Blake Bortles, number 3 overall. I do this because maybe there was an opportunity for the Jaguars to be able to move down and still get their guy. Maybe there was an opportunity for them to be trade partners with the Buffalo Bills, move down to that number 9 spot, be able to get an additional second-round pick this year, or maybe a first-round pick and a third-round pick next year, a first-round pick and a fourth-round pick next year, which is what the Bills gave up to Cleveland to move up to number 4, was a first and fourth in 2015. You know, sometimes you have to take risk and you have to take chances, and maybe the Jaguars would have been better served trying to trade down with the Bills and hoping Bortles fell into their lap at number 9. Or even if you trade down to number 9, maybe you sit there and you trade up to Minnesota's pick at number 8 like the Browns ended up doing to make sure that they got Justin Gilbert. I just not sure that the Jacksonville Jaguars did the right thing, not so much by taking Blake Bortles, but not trying to move down and not being able to move down to get him. I applaud an organization for saying, this is our guy, we've identified our guy, and we're going to take our guy. But I just wonder if they could have played the draft a little bit better in round number 1, and that's just my opinion. And as far as Blake Bortles, too, they're talking about the fact that they're basically looking at giving him a redshirt year in 2014. Well, if that's the case and you draft the quarterback 3rd overall, was he really the best quarterback on the board? I don't think so. I most certainly don't think so. I think both Bridgewater and Manziel were easily better NFL prospects than a Blake Bortles. Now, could he get into an NFL system, sit for a year, learn, work on his arm strength, work on his accuracy, and become a franchise NFL quarterback? Perhaps. I'm just not sure if I would want to tie my future to Blake Bortles as my first-round quarterback. That's all I'm saying. Now, in terms of the final grade for the Jaguars in this draft, I love the fact that they got Marqise Lee and Allen Robinson in the second round. Back-to-back wide receivers, back-to-back, to me, year-one contributors and long-term contributors that could really help out a Blake Bortles. I can say what I want about them taking Blake Bortles to number 3 overall, but what I cannot deny is that they did a good job of surrounding him with some help on that offense, giving him Lee and Robinson to go with Cecil Shorts on the outside. Now he has a nice 3-man wide receiver rotation. You want to throw in Ace Sanders in there, maybe a 4-man wide receiver rotation. I thought the Jaguars in particular did an outstanding job in day number 3 of getting some really good value picks, some potential future contributors, if not starters. Getting Aaron Colvin, the corner from Oklahoma, in round 4. Yeah, he won't contribute much of anything at all in 2014, but 2015 and beyond, this is a guy that was viewed as maybe a second-round talent. You were able to get him in round 4. Great value there. Telvin Smith, the outside linebacker from Florida State, the prototypical 4-3 weak side linebacker with speed to burn. Yeah, he had that failed drug test supposedly at the combine, but again, to get a guy like him in round number 5, a guy that was viewed as maybe a second to third round prospect, great value. Chris Smith, the defensive end from Arkansas. He's not going to wow you with his explosiveness, but he's a guy that can occasionally get some pass rush on opposing quarterbacks. And to get that type of guy again in round number 5 that was maybe viewed as a 3rd or 4th round prospect, great value. And then not to mention, obviously, Storm Johnson, being able to get him in the 7th round, a guy who I felt was a second-round pick type of talent in this draft, the number 3 running back in this class. To be able to get him in round number 7 was tremendous. But at the end of the day, this draft is going to be all about Blake Bortles and Blake Bortles' success or failure in the National Football League. Gus Bradley and David Caldwell have now made their statement. They have moved past the Blaine Gabbert era, thankfully for them, and Blake Bortles is their guy. And Blake Bortles is going to be given the opportunity at some point to take control of the Jacksonville Jaguars organization and give them an identity and give them some leadership and give them the quarterback that they have lacked, really, frankly. Some of you might say David Garrard. I go back to the days of Mark Brunell, but the one thing the Jaguars have never really had to me is that young franchise quarterback that they could build their hopes around as an organization long term. Blake Bortles potentially brings that to the table, but there's also tremendous risk here. This is far from a finished product, and I think sometimes the looks can be deceiving with Bortles a little bit. And for a Caldwell and a Bradley, ultimately, this is going to be their legacy. This is going to be the draft that they're measured on. This is going to be the quarterback that they're measured by. And that's just the way it is. I still thought the Jaguars did a decent job in this draft of really addressing some of the things that they needed to address. I gave them a grade of a B-. I love the picks of Lee and Robinson. I love the day 3 values that they got. And I thought, the Jacksonville Jaguars did the one thing they needed to set out to do above all else, and that is improve the talent on their roster. They've got several contributors out of this draft. And ultimately, you look back at it 3-4 years from now, if Blake Bortles develops into at least some type of franchise NFL quarterback, you're going to look back on this draft of the Jacksonville Jaguars and say this was the draft that changed everything for the organization.